Before there were vast digital archives and shelves that stretched across modern cities, there were scrolls of papyrus, tablets of clay, and codices of parchment. In dimly lit rooms, by the glow of oil lamps, scribes bent over fragile pages, copying words with patient care. These were the libraries of the ancient world, collections of human memory, fragile as blossoms in the wind, precious as gold, yet vulnerable to fire, flood, and time. The story of lost libraries is not one of noise, but of silence. It is the silence of forgotten halls, of dust-covered shelves, of words that once carried voices but are now unread. It is the silence of knowledge slipping away, not with thunder, but with a whisper. Tonight, as you listen, we will walk slowly through these vanished places, from the great library of Alexandria, to the clay tablets of Mesopotamia, to the scrolls buried in desert caves. We will move gently, as if through forgotten halls, listening to echoes of pages that can no longer be turned. This is not a tale of destruction alone, but of memory, of fragility, and of the quiet endurance of knowledge. Though many scrolls are lost, their whispers remain, guiding us through time. We have walked together through the shadows of forgotten halls, across sands that buried scrolls, into monasteries where monks whispered prayers over vellum, into caves where scrolls slept for centuries, into palaces where shelves rose high only to collapse into silence. From Alexandria's flames to Nalanda's smoke, from the codices of the Maya to the knots of the Inca, from Baghdad to Timbuktu, from the mountains of Ethiopia to the cities of Europe, the story of libraries is one of both loss and endurance. What have we learned in this long journey? That knowledge is fragile, bound in paper, parchment, clay, or memory, yet always vulnerable to time, to fire, to conquest. That silence often follows wisdom. That voices once loud may fade into whispers, or vanish entirely. And yet, we have also seen that memory is resilient. For every library lost, fragments survived. A manuscript carried in secret, a scroll buried in sand, a line of poetry remembered by heart. Knowledge has always found ways to endure, even in silence. Imagine all the libraries we have visited. As stars scattered across the night sky, some burn brightly, their collections preserved, their voices alive. Others are dim, their shelves reduced to ash, their manuscripts gone. Yet even in their absence, they form constellations, patterns of memory that guide us still. The silence of what was lost shapes us as much as the words that remain. Libraries, whether vast or humble, remind us that human beings have always longed to preserve their voices against time. From bamboo slips to bark paper, from papyrus to parchment, from knots of string to illuminated manuscripts, each culture found a way to say, "Remember us." The act of writing, of tying, of copying, of chanting was always an act of faith, faith that the future would listen, and though fire and war, flood and neglect have erased so much, we can still listen. When we unroll a papyrus fragment, when we touch a quipu cord, when we read a codex that survived against all odds, we are listening to whispers across time. They may be faint, but they are enough. They connect us to hands long gone, to minds that dreamed, to voices that once rose in prayer, in debate, in poetry. As you rest now, let the silence of these libraries surround you. Not an empty silence, but a gentle one, filled with echoes, with whispers, with fragments of memory. Imagine yourself walking slowly through a vast, timeless library, where all the scrolls and books and voices of history wait. The shelves rise into shadow, the air glows with lamplight, and every step you take is soft upon stone floors. You reach for a volume, unroll a scroll, touch a page, and in that moment, the silence becomes alive. The lost libraries are not truly gone, for they live in us, in our longing to remember, in our reverence for words, in our awareness of fragility. They remind us to listen, to preserve, to hold gently what has been entrusted to us. Their silence is not only an ending, but also an invitation to cherish what remains, to imagine what was lost, and to carry forward the light of memory. Sleep now, with these whispers in your heart. The scrolls may be silent, but their echoes endure. Along the shores of the Mediterranean, where ships carried spices, papyrus, and ideas across ancient waters, there once stood a city that promised eternity through knowledge. Alexandria, founded by Alexander the Great and later nurtured under the Ptolemaic kings, became a beacon for the curious, a harbor not only for ships but for thought itself. And within it rose a place that became legend, the Library of Alexandria. The library was more than walls and shelves. It was an idea that the knowledge of the world could be gathered in one place, preserved against time. Ships entering the harbor were said to be searched for scrolls. These were borrowed, copied, and stored. Scribes, their hands steady, their eyes tired, copied word for word the records of distant lands. Mathematics from Babylon, astronomy from Greece, medicine from Egypt, poetry from faraway isles, all flowed into this single vast collection. Imagine walking through its halls. The air is thick with the smell of papyrus, dry and faintly sweet. Light filters in from small windows high above, illuminating shelves that stretch into shadows. Scrolls rest in bundles, labeled in Greek and Egyptian, their titles written carefully. In red ink, scholars move silently, their robes brushing against stone floors, their voices hushed as they debate the movement of stars or the meaning of a line of Homer. Somewhere, a scribe dips his reed into ink, the scratch of his pen against papyrus steady and rhythmic. To sit in the Library of Alexandria was to feel both the weight and the fragility of human thought. A scroll might contain the cure for illness, the map of a star, the story of a forgotten hero. Yet each was fragile, a slip of papyrus that could crumble, a word that could fade, a fire that could consume it all in moments. Knowledge lived, but precariously, like a flame flickering in the wind. The Ptolemies, rulers of Egypt after Alexander, imagined this collection as more than scholarship. It was power, for to hold knowledge was to hold the world. They gathered works from Greece, Mesopotamia, India, and beyond. Stories say they even sought texts from ships wrecked in storms, from temples, from private collections across lands. Whether every detail is true hardly matters, for the dream itself was vast, to gather the memory of humanity under one roof. And yet, this very dream carried within it the seeds of silence. For what is vast can also be fragile. Fire, neglect, or conquest, all could undo centuries of careful labor. The library became not only a symbol of knowledge, but of loss. For though its halls are remembered, its scrolls are gone. Picture the night when flames touched its walls. Whether under Julius Caesar's siege, or later neglect, or repeated misfortune, the details are blurred. But imagine it, the smell of smoke rising into the Mediterranean air, the orange glow flickering against stone walls, the shouts of soldiers echoing through marble halls. Scrolls, once so carefully copied, ignite like dry leaves, their words vanishing into sparks. The silence that follows is heavier than the fire itself, the silence of knowledge unrecorded, voices unremembered. And yet, even in loss, the Library of Alexandria became eternal. Not in its scrolls, but in its story. It stands in memory as a symbol of both ambition and impermanence, a reminder that human knowledge is fragile, that what is gathered can be scattered, that what is preserved can be lost. But it also reminds us that memory survives not only in pages, but in hearts, in whispers, in the very longing to remember. As you sit in calm tonight, imagine yourself in its halls, before the fire, before the loss. Imagine running your hand along the shelves, the papyrus cool and rough beneath your fingers. Imagine the scholars bent in discussion, the scribes steady in their work, the faint light upon endless scrolls. Then imagine silence, not sorrowful, but gentle, as if the knowledge has not vanished, but transformed into whispers, still waiting to be heard. The Library of Alexandria is not gone. It lives in every story told about it, in every effort to preserve knowledge today, in every shelf of books and hum of servers that carry thought across time. It lives in the quiet understanding that though all things are impermanent, the desire to remember never fades. Long before papyrus scrolls filled the halls of Alexandria, and centuries before parchment carried words across medieval monasteries, there were tablets of clay. Heavy, fragile, inscribed with wedge-shaped marks, they formed the earliest libraries known to us. In the valleys of the Tigris and Euphrates, where rivers gave birth to some of humanity's first cities, scribes pressed reeds into wet clay, recording trade, laws, prayers, and stories. When these tablets dried, hardened by sun or fire, they carried memory, durable, silent, and eternal, though often forgotten beneath sand. The kings of Mesopotamia understood that power rested not only in armies and walls, but also in words. To rule a city meant to control knowledge, laws written for justice, rituals for gods, records of tribute, contracts of trade. And so archives grew, first in temple storerooms, then in royal palaces. Shelves filled with tablets stacked neatly, their surfaces etched with cuneiform lines. To us they appear simple, but to those who read them, they were voices, binding generations together. Imagine stepping into the royal archive of Nineveh, the capital of Assyria. The year is the 7th century BCE, and King Ashurbanipal reigns. He is not only a warrior but a scholar, a man who boasts of reading texts in Sumerian and Akkadian, languages already ancient in his day. He commands his scribes to collect writings from across Mesopotamia, medical texts, omens of stars, hymns to gods, lists of kings. Couriers bring tablets from distant cities, and in Nineveh they are copied, cataloged, and stored. The palace. Walls echo with the steady tapping of styluses upon clay. The library of Ashurbanipal, discovered in modern times, is one of the greatest treasures of the ancient world. Among its thousands of tablets lies the Epic of Gilgamesh, the tale of a king who seeks immortality, who learns the truth of human impermanence. To hold one of these tablets, even now, is to feel the echo of that story, pressed by hands nearly 3 millennia ago. Each wedge mark is a voice, silent yet alive. Picture a scribe at his work. He kneels before a flat piece of clay, soft and cool. In his hand, a reed stylus. With practiced movements, he presses marks into the surface, angled. Lines, small wedges, careful rows. He pauses, breathes, then inscribes again. Around him, the palace hums with life. Guards at their posts, servants carrying trays, priests preparing offerings. But in his corner, there is only silence, the slow emergence of words upon clay. When finished, the tablet is set aside to dry, and in that moment, memory is made tangible. These libraries were not meant for everyone. They were treasures of kings, tools of priests, instruments of rule. To read cuneiform was a skill of the elite, and knowledge was guarded as carefully as gold. Yet in their preservation, even unintended, they give us a glimpse into lives once hidden. We know the prices of barley, the shapes of constellations, the prayers whispered at dawn, the laws that governed trade, the myths that comforted hearts. All because scribes pressed lines into clay. The fragility of these collections lay not in fire, as with Alexandria, but in time and conquest. Palaces fell, cities burned, shells collapsed. Tablets lay buried in ruins, forgotten beneath earth. For centuries, they slept in silence until rediscovered by archaeologists. When brought to light, their wedge marks revealed a chorus of voices. Merchants bargaining, priests invoking, kings boasting, poets dreaming. To stand before the tablets of Mesopotamia today is to stand at the threshold of human memory. They are rough, heavy, unadorned, and yet they carry the earliest whispers of civilization. Their endurance reminds us that even the humblest material, clay shaped by hand, can outlast empires, can carry voices across millennia. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine walking through the ruins of Nineveh. The walls are broken, the palace is silent. Yet beneath your feet lie thousands of tablets, waiting in the earth. Imagine uncovering one, brushing away dust, seeing the wedge-shaped lines pressed long ago. You hold it in your hand, heavy, cool, eternal. In that silence, you hear the voices of kings and scribes, merchants and poets, all bound in clay. After Alexander's conquests, the Mediterranean and Near Eastern worlds became seas of learning, their currents flowing between cities rich with ambition. If Alexandria sought to be the unrivaled center of knowledge, other cities rose to challenge it. Among them, Pergamon, a hilltop city in Asia Minor, became a rival, its library glowing like a second flame in the dark, competing for the title of keeper of the world's memory. Pergamon was not as vast as Alexandria, yet it carried pride and determination. Its kings, the Attalids, wished to show that culture and wisdom could be as powerful as armies. They built a library near their Acropolis, within walls of marble and halls of columns, where scholars gathered and scribes worked steadily to copy and collect. Here, too, the idea was the same: to gather all the world's knowledge beneath one roof. The rivalry with Alexandria became more than myth. It was said that the Ptolemies of Egypt, jealous of Pergamon's growing fame, sought to hinder their progress. They restricted the export of papyrus, hoping to starve Pergamon's scribes of writing material. Yet necessity gave birth to innovation. Pergamon's artisans refined the use of parchment, prepared from animal skins, smoother and stronger than papyrus. It was called Pergamena, after the city itself, and became the ancestor of bound books in centuries to come. Thus, from rivalry, the world gained a new medium of memory. Imagine entering the library of Pergamon. Sunlight filters through high windows, falling upon rows of shelves where scrolls and parchment codices rest. The scent is different here, less of papyrus, more of leather and ink. Scholars in flowing robes move between alcoves, their voices low as they debate philosophy and astronomy. Scribes bend over desks, scraping skin smooth, inscribing lines with sharp pens. The air is filled with the quiet industry of preservation, the calm determination to match, if not surpass, Alexandria's glory. The kings of Pergamon adorned their city with more than scrolls. They built temples, theaters, and altars, blending knowledge with devotion, art with power. The great altar of Zeus rose with sculpted friezes, its carvings telling stories of gods and giants, a mirror to the tales recorded in their scrolls. In this city, knowledge was not hidden but celebrated, its presence woven into the stones of streets and halls. And yet, Pergamon, like Alexandria, faced impermanence. Its scrolls did not all survive, its halls did not endure untouched. Wars passed, empires shifted, libraries scattered. Some scrolls were carried away to Alexandria itself, others lost to time. Yet the memory of Pergamon's library lives on, not in what it preserved, but in what it gave: parchment, a medium that would carry the words of saints and emperors, poets and monks, across centuries. Picture the rivalry not as anger, but as two flames flickering upon the same horizon. One in Egypt, vast and ambitious, the other in Asia Minor, proud and inventive. Together, they carried forward the idea that memory could be gathered, preserved, and shared. Their competition was not destruction, but creation, and the world gained. From their struggle, as you rest tonight, imagine walking the marble halls of Pergamon's library. The shelves glow in lamplight, scrolls resting quietly, parchment stacked carefully. Outside, the Acropolis rises against the sky, its temples silhouetted in dusk. Scholars murmur softly, scribes scrape parchment in rhythm, and the city hums. With pride, the rivalry has faded, but the whispers remain, of Alexandria, of Pergamon, of the libraries that once dreamed of eternity. Far from the marble halls of Pergamon and the bustling harbor of Alexandria, another kind of library lay hidden, not in palaces or temples, but in caves of stone, carved by time and guarded by silence. Along the barren shores of the Dead Sea, in a landscape of dust, cliffs, and salt, scrolls were placed carefully into clay jars, sealed, and left in darkness. These were the writings of a people who sought not glory, but preservation, who believed that their words, even if their lives were scattered, must endure. The scrolls of Qumran, known today as the Dead Sea Scrolls, represent one of the most remarkable survivals of antiquity. Written between the 3rd century BCE and the 1st century CE, they contain fragments of scripture, hymns, rules, and community writings. For centuries they lay untouched, hidden in caves, their parchment and papyrus, fragile yet preserved by the desert's dryness. Only in the 20th century did they return to light when shepherds stumbled upon them, their jars breaking the long silence. Imagine the community that placed them there. The Essenes, a sect devoted to purity and order, withdrew from the wider world into the desert. They lived in stone dwellings near the caves, their lives disciplined, their rituals strict. Each day they studied the scriptures, copying them carefully by hand, their pens scratching upon parchment, their lamps flickering in the dry night air. To them, the scrolls were not only words but lifelines, the voice of God, the map of their existence. When danger grew, when war approached, they sealed their writings into jars, trusting the desert more than men to preserve them. Picture a scribe seated in a quiet room. The walls are bare stone, the table rough wood. A lamp glows beside him, its smoke curling upward. On his lap rests a strip of parchment, stretched and smooth. With a sharpened reed, he writes slowly, carefully, letters forming in black ink, line after line. Outside, the desert wind howls, carrying dust across the barren hills. Inside, silence reigns, broken only by the scratch of pen and the beating of his heart. When he finishes, he rolls the parchment, ties it with cord, and places it into a jar, sealing it with clay. The jar is carried into a cave, placed in darkness, left to wait for centuries. The desert itself became guardian of this hidden library. Its dryness slowed decay, its silence kept intruders away. For generations, the scrolls slept. Empires rose and fell, cities built and burned, languages shifted, and yet the words endured, resting in clay. When rediscovered, they opened a window into the beliefs and hopes of a long-vanished community, and into texts far older than any others preserved in such number. The Dead Sea Scrolls remind us that libraries are not always built of stone and marble. Sometimes they are hidden in caves, sealed in jars, carried not by grandeur but by faith. They show us that preservation does not always mean abundance. Even fragments, fragile and incomplete, can carry immense meaning. A torn piece of parchment, a faded line, can connect us to voices 2,000 years gone. To as you rest tonight, imagine entering one of these caves. The air is cool, heavy with the scent of earth and dust. Your footsteps echo softly upon the stone. In the corner, clay jars rest, their lids sealed. You approach, lift one gently, and open it. Inside, a scroll waits, its parchment yellowed, its ink faint but still visible. In that moment, the silence of centuries breaks, and the voices of an ancient community speak once more, quiet, fragile, enduring. In the heart of Baghdad, when the city was young and the world seemed to turn toward its golden age, there stood a place that shimmered not with jewels or gold, but with knowledge. It was called Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. Built under the Abbasid caliphs, especially Al-Mamun in the 9th century, it became one of the most luminous centers of scholarship the world had ever known. Here, knowledge flowed like a river, drawing from Greek, Persian, Indian, and Arab traditions, gathered and preserved in scrolls and books. The House of Wisdom was more than a library. It was a gathering place, a translation center, an observatory of thought. Scholars of many lands, speaking many languages, came to its halls. They carried scrolls from Byzantium, treatises from India, mathematical texts from Greece, and poetry from Persia. In Baghdad, these works were translated into Arabic, copied by scribes, debated by philosophers. To enter its halls was to step into a chorus of voices from across civilizations, united by the love of knowledge. Imagine walking through its courtyards. The air is warm, scented faintly with ink and parchment. Columns rise to hold shaded walkways, where scholars sit in circles, their voices soft but animated. A philosopher debates the nature of the stars, while beside him, a mathematician sketches numbers into sand. A physician reads aloud from a Greek text, while a scribe carefully copies the words into Arabic. The sound is not of clashing swords, but of murmured thought, steady as flowing water. The Abbasid caliphs supported this pursuit not only for curiosity, but for power. Knowledge was a tool of governance, a guide for science, a wealth greater than gold. Astronomy aided calendars, medicine healed the sick, mathematics improved trade and engineering. Yet beyond utility, the House of Wisdom carried a spirit of reverence for thought itself, the belief that learning was sacred, a light against ignorance. Picture a night within its halls. Lanterns glow, casting golden pools of light upon scrolls and manuscripts. A scribe bends over a text, his reed pen moving steadily. He translates words of Plato into Arabic or Sanskrit texts on astronomy into new forms. Around him, others read aloud, correcting, refining, questioning. The night is quiet, but alive, alive with voices of many lands, now bound together in Baghdad. The House of Wisdom also became a center for discovery. Muslim scholars did not only preserve what they translated, they expanded upon it. Al-Khwarizmi developed algebra, Ibn Sina, Avicenna, wrote vast works on medicine, Alhazen studied optics and light. These ideas, born from old texts but transformed with new insight, would later travel into Europe, sparking fresh waves of learning. Thus, Baghdad became a bridge of civilizations, its library a vessel for knowledge across ages, and yet, as with all things, impermanence shadowed even this house of light. In 1258, when the Mongols sacked Baghdad, legend tells that the Tigris River ran black with the ink of books thrown into its waters, blue with the bindings of manuscripts torn apart. The story may carry exaggeration, but its essence is true. Much of the House of Wisdom was lost, its shelves scattered, its voices silenced by fire and conquest. Still, its spirit lingers. The translations made there, the discoveries born there, the reverence for knowledge that flourished there, all remain. They passed into Europe, into Asia, into the future. To speak of algebra, to study medicine, to map the stars, these are echoes of Baghdad's library, whispers of the House of Wisdom as you rest tonight. Imagine yourself in its courtyard at dusk. Lanterns glow beneath arches, the sound of soft debate fills the air, the fragrance of parchment and ink surrounds you. Scholars from many lands share food, share words, share ideas. The stars begin to rise above Baghdad, and with them, thoughts ascend as well. The House of Wisdom stands, not as ruins, but as memory, as whisper, as light. As Rome faded, its empire divided, and the West sank into centuries of turmoil, one city endured as a beacon of order, wealth, and knowledge. Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. Upon its hills, where the Bosphorus met the Sea of Marmara, rose not only palaces and churches, but also a library that sought to preserve the wisdom of Greece and Rome. Known simply as the Library of Constantinople, it carried forward what Alexandria had lost, keeping alive scrolls and codices that might otherwise have vanished. The origins of this library reach back to the 4th century, when Constantine founded his capital and his successors sought to preserve the literature of the ancient world. By the 5th century, the collection held tens of thousands of works, histories of Herodotus, tragedies of Sophocles, dialogues of Plato, writings of Aristotle, and countless others. These manuscripts were not only Greek, but Latin, reflecting the twin heritage of the empire. Imagine walking its halls during the height of Byzantium. Marble floors gleam beneath soft lamplight. Shelves of codices stand in ordered rows, their bindings of leather and wood carefully marked. Scholars in flowing robes, their hair bound with simple cords, bend over lecterns, reading by candlelight. A scribe copies lines from Homer, his hand steady as he preserves words written 1,000 years before. The air carries the faint scent of wax and parchment, the silence broken only by the rustle of pages. The library was not static. Works were recopied as old scrolls decayed, Latin texts translated into Greek, knowledge reorganized for new generations. Emperors like Theodosius and Justinian supported its growth, seeing in it a symbol of imperial pride, the wisdom of the ancients preserved within the Christian capital of the world. To walk its halls was to step into a bridge between eras, where pagan philosophers and Christian theologians shared shelves, their words surviving side by side. And yet, fragility haunted it. Fire struck Constantinople repeatedly. In the 5th century, flames destroyed hundreds of thousands of works. Later blazes consumed more. Each time, scribes rushed to save what they could, carrying codices into safety, rewriting lost works from memory or surviving copies. Still, much was gone forever. Whole authors vanished. Plays, histories, philosophies that now exist only in fragments, their silence louder than words. Picture a fire breaking out at night. Flames spread quickly, crackling against shelves, smoke curling into high ceilings. Scholars and servants rush through the halls, arms full of codices, their faces lit by orange glow. Outside, The city bells ring, calling for water, calling for prayer. Yet by dawn, countless works are ash, their wisdom lifted into smoke. The library endures, but thinner, its voice weakened. For centuries more, Constantinople remained a center of learning. Monks in scriptoria copied the classics, preserving them for future generations. When the West began to awaken in the Renaissance, many of its treasures came from texts that had been safeguarded in Byzantine libraries, carried west after the city's fall. The survival of Homer, of Plato, of much of ancient Greek thought, it is owed, in part, to the resilience of Constantinople's guardians of memory. But in 1453, the final silence came. The Ottoman armies of Mehmed II breached the walls, cannons, breaking what had stood for 1,000 years. The city fell, its treasures scattered. The library of Constantinople, like Alexandria before it, was lost. Whether by fire, by plunder, or by neglect, the manuscripts vanished. The halls grew quiet, their shelves empty, their memory dissolved into myth. And yet, as with all lost libraries, its spirit lingers. Fragments survived, carried west, copied in monasteries, translated into Latin. From these scraps, Europe rediscovered the wisdom of Greece and Rome, and the Renaissance was born. Thus the library's loss became, paradoxically, a source of renewal. Its silence gave rise to fresh voices. Its ashes fed new flames. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine standing upon the walls of Constantinople at twilight. The city glows with lamps. The domes of Hagia Sophia rise against the darkening sky, and within the library, scholars bend still over their codices. Outside, the world waits. Empires shift, storms approach. Inside, the words of the ancients whisper, fragile yet enduring. The city will fall, but knowledge flows onward, like a river, through time. When the Roman Empire in the West fell, when cities crumbled and roads grew over with weeds, the written word seemed in danger of fading into silence. Yet within stone walls, far from courts and battlefields, another kind of library endured. In monasteries scattered across Europe, from Ireland's windswept shores to Italy's quiet valleys, monks gathered scrolls and codices, copying them by hand, preserving the fragile link between antiquity and the Middle Ages. The monastic library was not grand like Alexandria, nor proud like Pergamon. It was humble, cloistered, quiet. Yet in its silence lay its strength. Shelves of wooden boards held codices bound in leather, their pages of vellum filled with lines of Latin, sometimes decorated with flourishes of red or blue ink. The library was often small, a single chamber near the scriptorium, but to the monks it was a treasure greater than gold. Imagine a monastery in the Irish hills during the 7th century. The wind howls outside, waves crash against cliffs, but within the stone walls there is calm. A scribe bends over a desk, his quill scratching steadily across vellum. He copies the Gospels, adding intricate knots and spirals in the margins, bright colors gleaming against pale parchment. Each page is both devotion and preservation, both prayer and memory. By such hands, the wisdom of centuries passed through storms of history. The scriptoria, rooms devoted to writing, were filled with quiet industry. Monks sat at wooden desks, each with ink, quills, and lamps. They worked slowly, carefully, often in cold halls lit only by narrow windows. Their backs ached, their eyes strained, but their patience was immense. To copy a book might take months, even years, yet they endured, believing their work a form of prayer. In each line of Latin, in each illuminated letter, they sought to honor God and preserve wisdom. Not all works were sacred. Alongside scriptures and hymns, monks copied texts of philosophy, medicine, astronomy, and law. They preserved Aristotle and Boethius, Galen and Virgil, Cicero and Ovid. Without their hands, much of the classical world would have vanished forever. The survival of so many voices of antiquity, their poetry, their science, their stories, is owed to men in robes, working silently by candlelight. Picture the shelves of a medieval cloister library. Wooden boards, iron clasps, codices stacked carefully. Some are plain, bound in brown leather, their spines marked simply. Others are adorned with jewels, gifts from patrons, their covers glowing in lamplight. A monk walks the aisles, his sandals, quiet upon stone, selecting a volume to carry into the cloister. He sits beneath an archway, the garden beyond filled with the scent of herbs, and reads in silence. The world outside is turbulent, but within, words flow steady. The monastic library was more than preservation, it was transformation. As monks copied, they sometimes translated, sometimes glossed texts with commentary, sometimes reshaped them for new audiences. Knowledge was not only saved, but reinterpreted, woven into the fabric of medieval thought. Thus, the monasteries became bridges between Rome and Christendom, between ancient philosophers and medieval scholars, between silence and continuity. And yet, these libraries too were fragile. Viking raids burned monasteries in the north, fires consumed libraries in the south, neglect and war scattered manuscripts. Many were lost, but many survived, carried from one monastery to another, hidden in trunks, treasured by generations. Their endurance is a testament to devotion, to patience, to the quiet labor of those who asked for no recognition but left us the words of ages. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine sitting in a medieval scriptorium. The hall is cold, the only warmth a candle flickering beside you. Before you lies a sheet of vellum, smooth beneath your hand. You dip your quill in ink, steady your breath, and begin to write. Each line is slow, careful, silent. Outside, the world changes, but within, words endure. You are part of the chain of memory, binding past to future, preserving voices in silence. Long before parchment in Europe or codices in Byzantium, China had already been shaping knowledge into scrolls of silk and bamboo. The emperors of the Middle Kingdom understood that to govern was not only to command armies but to preserve and control the written word. Across dynasties, vast imperial libraries rose, housing thousands upon thousands of texts, philosophy, medicine, astronomy, history, poetry, law. To walk their halls was to see not only the record of a nation, but the memory of humanity itself. The earliest libraries of China were not of stone, but of bamboo slips bound together with string. Words were carved or brushed upon their surfaces, heavy to hold, cumbersome to store. Yet even in this fragile form, knowledge spread, carried by scholars and officials. By the time of the Han Dynasty, silk scrolls and eventually paper transformed. Preservation, allowing libraries to swell in number and scale. Imagine the Han Imperial Library, a vast collection overseen by court scholars. Shelves of wooden racks stretch into shadow, filled with scrolls of silk and paper rolled neatly, labeled with wooden tags. The air is perfumed faintly by ink and brush, the fragrance of pine soot and glue. Scholars in flowing robes sit upon mats, copying texts with brushes, their movements graceful and deliberate. The rustle of silk, the whisper of brushes, the steady rhythm of thought fill the hall. One of the most extraordinary efforts of preservation came under the Han Emperor. The court gathered classics of Confucius, histories of dynasties, astronomical records, and ritual texts, ensuring that wisdom survived even after the turmoil of the Qin dynasty, when many works had been burned under the infamous burning of books decree. In this act of preservation, China demonstrated a resilience unmatched. Though fires had consumed, memory was restored, rebuilt, made whole again. Later dynasties continued the tradition. The Tang emperors collected poetry, medicine, and Buddhist sutras, filling temples and palaces with scrolls. The Song dynasty saw the rise of printing, and with it, libraries flourished as never before. Entire collections could be reproduced, their words carried from one province to another, their wisdom shared beyond the walls of emperors. Picture a scholar in the Song era. He sits in a quiet library, a stack of printed texts before him. The pages are thin, their characters sharp, pressed from wooden blocks carved with care. He studies a medical treatise, comparing it to an older scroll, making notes in the margins. Around him, others study the stars, the law, the poetry of Li Bai and Du Fu. Outside, the city hums with life, but within the library, there is only silence, the silence of thought enduring across centuries. And yet, fragility haunted even these great collections. Fires swept palaces, wars toppled dynasties, floods washed away storerooms. The Tang capital of Chang'an, once filled with scrolls, saw destruction during rebellion. Later, the Mongol invasions scattered libraries, their treasures lost to conquest. Even so, each dynasty rebuilt, gathering once more, preserving anew. Knowledge, though fragile, endured like bamboo bending in the wind. Perhaps the greatest of these efforts came in the Ming dynasty, with the creation of the Yongle Encyclopedia. Commissioned in the early 15th century, it sought to gather all known knowledge of China into one vast collection: history, science, art, religion, philosophy. It stretched across thousands of volumes, the largest encyclopedia the world had ever known. Yet even this monumental work proved fragile. Fires in the Forbidden City consumed much of it. Wars scattered the rest, leaving only fragments to survive into modern times. The story of China's libraries is thus one of both vastness and impermanence. No other civilization preserved so much for so long, yet no other faced such constant threats from fire, war, and time. The paradox is clear. The very scale of preservation made the losses feel greater, yet the resilience of Chinese scholars ensured that knowledge, though wounded, endured. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine yourself within a Chinese imperial library. Lanterns glow softly against carved wooden beams, scrolls rest neatly in racks, scholars bend over desks, their brushes moving in flowing strokes. Outside, the city hums, dynasties rise and fall, but within, the scrolls endure, fragile yet eternal. You run your hand across a bamboo slip, its surface cool, its characters firm. In that touch, you feel the presence of centuries, voices that whisper still in silence. Deep in the forests of Mesoamerica, beneath canopies of ceiba and palm, a different kind of library once flourished. The Maya, with their towering temples and precise calendars, created books, codices, made not of papyrus or parchment, but of bark paper coated with lime, folded like screens, painted with vibrant inks. These books carried their science, their rituals, their histories, and their stars. And like so many other libraries, they were destined to fade, consumed not only by time but by flame. The Mayan codices were unlike anything in the Old World. Their pages unfolded accordion-like, stretching into long, continuous surfaces. Upon them, scribes painted glyphs in deep black, red, and blue, their symbols rich with meaning, their figures depicting gods, rulers, animals, and celestial movements. Each page was both art and text, both ritual and record. To read a codex was to walk through the cosmos itself, guided by the brush of a scribe. Imagine sitting with a Mayan scribe in a city like Copan or Chichen Itza. Before him lies a strip of bark paper, smoothed and coated in white plaster. He dips his brush into pigment, carefully tracing glyphs that tell the movement of Venus, the rituals of planting, the names of kings. His strokes are steady, his concentration unbroken, for these books are sacred, their creation an act of devotion. Around him, incense burns, the air thick with the smell of resin and smoke. The codex grows page by page, a library in miniature, destined for priests and nobles who read. Its secrets by torchlight, the Maya held knowledge with reverence. Their codices tracked not only rituals and myths, but the precise cycles of time. They charted eclipses, solstices, and planetary paths with astonishing accuracy, linking them to ceremonies of planting and harvest. Their astronomy rivaled that of any ancient culture, their libraries serving both the sky and the earth. In their codices, science and spirit intertwined, each page a fusion of calculation and prayer, but fragility haunted them. Bark paper, though ingenious, could not withstand centuries without care. Many codices were lost to humidity, to insects, to the slow erosion of jungle life. And worse, when Spanish conquerors arrived in the 16th century, they saw not wisdom, but heresy. Priests, fearing the glyphs as pagan superstition, gathered the books and burned them. Diego de Landa, a Franciscan bishop, oversaw one such destruction in 1562, writing later that the Maya regretted it to an amazing degree. The flames consumed not only paper, but centuries of knowledge. Entire libraries turned to smoke. Picture that moment of burning. A plaza filled with smoke, codices piled high, their painted pages curling in fire. The colors of red and blue fade into black ash. The glyphs vanish into sparks. The people watch, some silent, some weeping, their memories carried away in smoke. The silence afterward is heavier than the fire, for it is the silence of voices erased, the silence of wisdom denied. Today, only a handful of Mayan codices survive: the Dresden, Madrid, Paris, and Grolier codices. Fragile, incomplete, yet luminous, they show us a glimpse of what was lost. Their pages are filled with gods of maize and rain, with charts of Venus, with rituals for the seasons. To hold one of these rare codices is to hold a fragment of a shattered library, a whisper of a civilization's vast memory. The lost libraries of the Maya remind us that knowledge is not only fragile, but vulnerable to misunderstanding. What one culture revered, another feared. What one people treasured, another destroyed. And yet, even in loss, the spirit of the Maya endures. Their cities still rise in stone above the jungle. Their glyphs still speak from monuments. Their calendars still amaze with their precision. The silence of their codices is deep, but not final. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine unrolling one of these painted books. The figures of gods appear before you, bright and strange, their faces both human and divine. Glyphs flow in careful rows, their meaning complex but steady. Around you, the jungle hums, the stars wheel above, and the codex in your hands connects. Earth and sky, time and spirit. Even in fragments, it whispers still, a library in silence, yet alive. In the fertile plains of northern India, where rivers meandered and monks walked barefoot along dusty paths, there once rose a great center of learning, Nalanda. More than a monastery, more than a school, it was a city of wisdom. Founded in the 5th century and flourishing for centuries afterward, Nalanda became the heartbeat of Buddhist scholarship. Its halls and cloisters held not only monks, but libraries vast beyond imagining, collections so immense that they seemed to hold the very universe upon their shelves. Nalanda was unlike any other library in the world. Where Alexandria dreamed of gathering all knowledge, Nalanda lived that dream daily. Thousands of students and teachers gathered there, from India, China, Tibet, Korea, and beyond. The library, known by names like Dharma Gunj, Mountain of Truth, was said to house hundreds of thousands of manuscripts. These were stored in 3 great multi-storied buildings, each filled with scrolls and palm leaf manuscripts, copied carefully by monks with steady hands. Imagine walking through these halls. At dawn, the air is cool, heavy with the fragrance of oil lamps. Rows upon rows of shelves stretch upward, filled with manuscripts bound in cloth, inscribed with lines of Sanskrit and Pali. Monks move silently between them, carrying texts to classrooms, where lessons will soon begin. Outside, the sound of bells rings through courtyards, calling the community to prayer. Inside, the silence of study is profound, broken only by the rustle of pages and the scratch of styluses upon palm leaves. Nalanda was not only about preservation, but transformation. Here, monks debated philosophy, astronomy, medicine, mathematics. They studied the teachings of the Buddha, but also the works of foreign lands, translating texts, comparing ideas, creating new insights. Xuanzang, the great Chinese pilgrim, studied here in the 7th century, carrying back with him hundreds of manuscripts to China, spreading Nalanda's influence far beyond India. The library was thus not a hoard of static texts, but a living organism, a flame of thought that touched all who entered. Picture a classroom beneath a tree in Nalanda's courtyard. A teacher sits cross-legged, surrounded by students in saffron robes. He holds a palm leaf manuscript, its script neat and flowing. He reads aloud, pausing to explain, while students scribble notes upon their own leaves. Birds sing above, the breeze rustles the branches, but the focus is deep, the knowledge flowing like a river. When class ends, the students return there. Manuscripts to the library, where shelves groan under the weight of centuries. But as with so many other libraries, impermanence shadowed Nalanda. In the 12th century, armies swept through northern India, and Nalanda fell to conquest. The great libraries, with their countless manuscripts, were set ablaze. For months, it is said, the fires burned, the smoke rising like a funeral pyre for Wisdom. Palm leaves turned to ash, cloth bindings blackened, words dissolved into sparks. Monks fled, carrying what little they could. What had taken centuries to gather vanished in days. Imagine the silence afterward. Empty halls, shelves charred, courtyards filled with ash. The bells that once called to prayer are silent, the classrooms empty. The library that once held the memory of a civilization lies in ruins, its wisdom gone. And yet, the echoes remain. In the texts carried to Tibet, to China, to other monasteries that preserved fragments. Nalanda itself is gone, but its spirit endures, scattered across the world in whispers. The flames of Nalanda remind us that even the greatest libraries are fragile, that knowledge, though vast, can vanish in a single storm. But they also remind us that memory is resilient. Though the manuscripts are lost, the influence of Nalanda lives on in Buddhist thought, in the spread of learning, in the whispers of pilgrims who once walked its courtyards to as you rest tonight. Imagine standing in Nalanda's ruins. The brick walls still rise, red against the sky, their outlines marking where great halls once stood. Birds nest in the cracks, grass grows between stones. The wind carries silence where once voices debated. Close your eyes, and you can almost hear it again. The rustle of palm leaves, the chant of monks, the steady hum of learning. Nalanda is gone, yet in memory, it whispers still. In the heart of the Sahara, where golden dunes stretch endlessly beneath a sky of brilliant blue, one might not expect to find books. And yet, in Timbuktu, a city near the Niger River, there once flourished one of the most remarkable collections of learning in the world. Here, where caravans carried salt, gold, and ivory across the desert, manuscripts were traded with equal reverence. In clay-walled libraries, scholars gathered to read, write, and debate, their voices rising in a place where silence otherwise ruled. The story of Timbuktu begins in the 14th and 15th centuries, when the Mali and Songhai empires transformed the city into a hub of trade and culture. Caravans of camels, laden with goods, arrived after weeks of crossing the desert. Along with merchants came scholars, bringing manuscripts copied in Cairo, Fez, and beyond. Slowly, a vast collection grew. Tens of thousands of works, covering law, medicine, astronomy, poetry, history, and theology. Imagine a courtyard in Timbuktu, its walls of sun-baked clay glowing red in the evening light. Beneath a canopy, a scholar sits with a manuscript upon his knees. He reads aloud in Arabic, his students seated around him, their eyes fixed upon the text. The pages are delicate, ink flowing in graceful calligraphy, margins filled with commentary from generations of readers. Around them, the desert wind stirs, carrying the scent of dust and salt. The manuscripts of Timbuktu were not kept in a single grand library, but scattered across families and mosques. Each collection was a treasure, handed down through generations. Shelves carved into clay walls held bound volumes, their covers of leather decorated with geometric patterns. To walk through the city was to walk through a living library, each house and mosque a keeper of memory at its height. Timbuktu's scholarship rivaled that of any great city. The Sankore University drew students from across Africa, its courtyards, filled with debate. Teachers lectured on law and theology, but also on the stars, on medicine, on poetry. Knowledge was not confined to the sacred. It embraced the practical, the cosmic, the beautiful. Manuscripts were copied endlessly, each scribe's hand ensuring that wisdom spread beyond one generation. Picture a scribe at work. He sits cross-legged in a small room, the air cooled despite the desert heat outside. Before him lies a sheet of parchment, his ink made from soot and gum. With a reed pen, he writes in flowing Arabic script, his hand steady, his heart patient. Each word is a prayer, each line a link in the chain of memory. Outside, camels groan, merchants haggle, children laugh, but inside, silence reigns, broken only by the scratch of pen upon parchment. Fragility, however, lingered. The desert, though protective in its dryness, also threatened. Sandstorms could bury collections, insects could gnaw parchment, fire could destroy homes. Yet greater danger came from conquest. In the 16th century, when Morocco invaded, libraries were seized, manuscripts scattered. Many were carried north, lost in transit. Others were hidden by families, buried in trunks beneath sand, wrapped in cloth, guarded in silence. Even in modern times, Timbuktu's manuscripts faced peril. During recent conflicts, libraries were threatened with destruction, yet once more, families carried volumes into safety, hiding them away in remote villages, preserving them as their ancestors once did. The story of Timbuktu's manuscripts is not only one of loss, but of resilience, a testament to generations who risked everything to preserve words. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine standing in a library in Timbuktu. The clay walls are cool to the touch, the shelves carved directly into them. Manuscripts rest in neat bundles, their leather covers soft with age, their pages filled with calligraphy and commentary. A scholar unrolls one before you, reading softly, his voice blending with the rustle of desert wind outside. In that moment, the silence of the desert and the wisdom of centuries meet, fragile yet enduring. In the quiet courtyards of Kyoto, beneath the painted screens and lantern-lit verandas of the Heian court, words flowed across parchment like rivers of ink. Japan, in its early centuries, did not possess vast stone libraries like Alexandria or Nalanda, yet its memory was preserved in scrolls, copied with care, stored in palaces, monasteries, and hidden chests. These were libraries of silk and paper, fragile and beautiful, shaped by both reverence and impermanence. The Heian period, from the 8th to the 12th century, was an age of elegance. Aristocrats composed poetry at banquets, courtiers exchanged verses like gifts, and women wrote diaries that became treasures of literature. The great works of the time, The Tale of Genji by Murasaki Shikibu, The Pillow Book by Sei Shonagon, were written not to be stored in stone halls, but to be shared in quiet chambers, copied onto scrolls by hand, each character brushed with flowing grace. To read them was to enter a world of subtle beauty, of whispered court intrigue, of fleeting blossoms falling across painted gardens. Imagine a scribe of the Heian court. He sits upon tatami mats, a low desk before him. Beside him lies an inkstone, a brush, and sheets of paper as pale as morning mist. He dips his brush, lifts it, and begins to write. Each stroke flows like calligraphy, more art than text, the brush moving in rhythm with his breath. Around him, sliding doors painted with cranes and pines open to reveal a garden or cherry blossoms drift in silence. The scribe pauses, gazes at the petals falling, then continues, the fleeting beauty outside mirrored in the flowing words within. Buddhist monasteries, too, became keepers of memory. Sutras from China and Korea were copied with devotion, their lines treated as sacred. To write a sutra was itself an act of prayer, each brushstroke a vow. Libraries within temples held these scrolls, often stored in lacquered chests or revolving bookcases, their presence both scholarly and spiritual. A monk might spend years copying a single scripture, his life devoted to the preservation of words he believed eternal. Picture a temple library at night. Lanterns glow softly against polished wood. Shelves hold rows of scrolls wrapped in silk, each tied carefully with cord. A monk kneels before a low desk, his brush steady as he inscribes sutras. Outside, the wind rustles bamboo. The temple bell tolls faintly in the distance. Within, silence is complete, broken only by the gentle scratch of brush upon paper. Each stroke is both preservation and offering, memory shaped by devotion. And yet, fragility shadowed these libraries. Paper and silk, unlike clay or stone, were vulnerable to fire, insects, and dampness. Palaces burned, temples were looted in wars, scrolls decayed in storerooms. Much of Japan's early literature was lost to these quiet disasters. Fires in Kyoto consumed entire collections, erasing centuries of memory in hours. What survives are fragments, scattered scrolls, rare manuscripts treasured as national treasures today. Still, Japan embraced impermanence not as defeat, but as beauty. The very philosophy of mono no aware, the awareness of life's transience, shaped its literature and libraries. A scroll might not endure forever, but while it lasted, it was precious, its fragility giving it grace. To handle a scroll was to feel both its weight and its impermanence, to understand that knowledge, like blossoms, was fleeting to as you close your eyes tonight. Imagine sitting in a Heian library chamber. The walls are lined with silk-wrapped scrolls, their titles written in graceful calligraphy. Outside, the moonlight glows upon a still pond, its reflection silver upon the water. Inside, you unroll a scroll of the tale of Genji, its characters flowing like poetry, its pages whispering of love and loss, beauty and impermanence. You feel the presence of centuries, fragile yet enduring, carried in ink, in paper, in silence. In the vast expanse of the Silk Road, where caravans moved slowly across deserts and mountains, there lay the oasis town of Dunhuang. For travelers, it was a place of rest, a gateway between east and west. For monks and pilgrims, it was sacred ground, a site of meditation and devotion. And hidden within its caves, carved into the sandstone cliffs of the Mogeo Grottos, lay one of the most extraordinary libraries in human history, sealed away for centuries, waiting in silence to be found. The story begins in the 11th century, when a chamber known today as the Library Cave was filled with scrolls and manuscripts. Thousands of texts, covering religion, history, poetry, astronomy, medicine, and daily records, were carefully placed inside. Some were written in Chinese, others in Tibetan, Sanskrit, Codices, and more. This was no single culture's memory, but a crossroads of civilizations, preserved in silence. Why the cave was sealed is still a mystery. Some say the scrolls were hidden during a time of war. Others believe the monks of Dunhuang, overwhelmed by the accumulation of centuries, simply closed the chamber as an act of reverence. Whatever the reason, the cave remained untouched for nearly 1,000 years, the manuscripts sleeping in darkness while empires rose and fell outside. Imagine the moment of sealing. Monks, robed in saffron and brown, carry bundles of scrolls into the cave. They stack them neatly, row upon row, their titles written in careful brushstrokes. Candles flicker against the painted walls of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, casting soft light upon the labor. When the last scroll is placed, the entrance is closed, stones piled, plaster smoothed. Silence descends, and the cave becomes a tomb of memory. For centuries, sand drifted against the cliffs, the desert winds howling outside. Within, the cave remained cool, dark, still. The scrolls endured, paper and silk preserved by the dryness of the desert air, their ink unfaded, their colors bright. 1,000 years passed. Dynasties changed, trade routes shifted, yet the scrolls remained, untouched, unremembered, sleeping. Then, in the early 20th century, the cave was rediscovered. A Taoist monk, Wang Yuanlu, acting as caretaker of the grottos, noticed a crack in a wall. Behind it lay the sealed chamber, filled floor to ceiling with scrolls. When the door was opened, the silence of centuries broke. Dust rose into the air. Light fell upon manuscripts unseen for a millennium, and the voices of Dunhuang returned. Imagine stepping into that cave. The air is thick, dry, filled with the scent of ancient paper. Scrolls lie in bundles, some wrapped in silk, others loose, their characters flowing across the surfaces in steady lines. The walls are painted with saints and deities, their faces calm, as if guarding the library through the ages. To touch one scroll is to bridge 1,000 years, to feel the breath of monks long gone, to hear whispers in languages half forgotten. The Dunhuang manuscripts revealed a world of astonishing diversity. Buddhist sutras sat beside local contracts, and letters, medical treatises beside poems. Some were sacred, others mundane. Together, they painted a picture not only of religion but of daily life, of trade, of song, of humanity. The cave became not only a library, but a time capsule, a glimpse into the texture of a vanished world. Yet even in rediscovery, fragility persisted. Many scrolls were removed by explorers, carried to London, Paris, St. Petersburg, and Beijing. Their dispersal preserved them, but also fragmented them, scattering the cave's voice across continents. Today, only by piecing together collections can we hear again the full chorus of Dunhuang's whispers. The cave of 1,000 scrolls reminds us that sometimes knowledge endures not by being read, but by being hidden. In darkness, silence becomes preservation. In forgetfulness, memory waits. Dunhuang teaches us that even when the world moves on, fragments of the past may sleep quietly, ready to return when the time is right. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine sitting in that cave, surrounded by scrolls. The air is cool, the silence deep, the painted eyes of Buddhas watching over you. You unroll a scroll, its paper soft, its ink clear. Outside, the desert wind howls, but within, time itself seems to pause. The cave is no longer forgotten. Its whispers live again. Long before marble halls rose in Greece, before clay tablets filled Assyrian palaces, the Nile carried words upon its waters. Along its banks, where reeds grew thick and green, Egyptians discovered how to make papyrus, thin sheets pressed from stalks, smooth enough to carry brush and ink. From this humble invention grew the earliest scrolls, and with them, libraries of temples and palaces that preserved the wisdom of one of the world's first civilizations. Egypt's libraries were not always grand buildings, but they were sacred. Many were housed within temples, where priests recorded rituals, hymns, and calendars of the gods. Others belonged to palaces, where scribes kept records of taxes, trade, and law. To read in Egypt was to join the ranks of the initiated, for literacy was rare, and the written word carried divine weight. Hieroglyphs themselves were called the words of the gods. To write was an act of creation. To store words was to preserve eternity. Imagine the temple library at Karnak. Beyond the towering columns and painted walls, within chambers cool and dim, shelves of wooden boards held rolls of papyrus bound with string. Each scroll bore titles written in red, their surfaces filled with neat black lines of hieroglyphs. A priest scribe enters, his white linen robes whispering as he walks. He selects a scroll and carries it to a low table. By the light of an oil lamp, he unrolls it slowly, the crisp sound of papyrus filling the silence. The words before him tell the rituals of dawn, the hymns to Ammonius, the instructions for festivals. As he reads, he joins a chain of memory that stretches back centuries. Not all scrolls were sacred. Some recorded accounts of grain, lists of workers, instructions for medicine. Others told stories, tales of voyages, of magicians, of kings, and gods. The famous tale of Sinew, one of the world's earliest works of literature, was preserved on such papyri. So too were records of dreams, omens, and love poems written in flowing hieratic script. Libraries in Egypt were as much about daily life as about eternity, preserving the rhythms of both heaven and earth. But papyrus, though ingenious, was fragile. The dry sands of Egypt preserved some scrolls for millennia, yet many more were lost to dampness, fire, or decay. Tombs sometimes held libraries buried with their owners, yet thieves and time scattered them. When temples fell, their archives burned or were abandoned, the papyrus crumbling to dust. Much of what Egypt wrote has vanished, leaving only fragments. Picture the burial of a nobleman. Alongside his jewelry and food for the afterlife, scribes placed scrolls of papyrus into his tomb. These are spells from the Book of the Dead, instructions for the journey beyond. The scrolls are rolled carefully, wrapped in linen, laid beside the sarcophagus. The tomb is sealed, darkness falling. For centuries, the papyri sleep in silence, until rediscovered by archaeologists, their colors still bright, their words still alive. One of the greatest tragedies was the destruction of temple archives during times of conquest. When cities were looted, scrolls were often burned, their ashes scattered by the wind. Fires consumed not only papyrus, but centuries of memory. The silence left behind is immeasurable, the loss of entire histories, philosophies, and poems that may never be known again, and yet, fragments survive. Today, papyri rest in museums across the world, fragments of contracts, hymns, letters, and poems. To look at them is to see not just ink on plant fiber, but the breath of a civilization, the whispers of voices that once lived beside the Nile. The Egyptians sought eternity in stone pyramids and temples, but also in scrolls of papyrus. Many have crumbled, but their spirit endures. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine walking along the Nile at dusk. The reeds sway gently in the wind, the water glows with reflected sunlight, and in your hands you hold a roll of papyrus. Its surface is smooth, its characters graceful. You unroll it slowly, the words unfolding like the river itself, flowing, eternal, fragile, alive. In that moment, the silence of Egypt's library surrounds you, whispering softly across time. High upon the plateaus of central Mexico, in a world of lakes, causeways, and towering temples, the Aztecs built a city of shimmering stone, Tenochtitlan. At its heart rose pyramids dedicated to gods of sun and rain, marketplaces filled with the hum of trade, and palaces where scribes bent over folded sheets of bark paper and deerskin. These were the codices of the Aztecs, painted books that recorded their history, their rituals, their laws, and their cosmos. To walk among them was to step into a library not of silent scrolls, but of vivid images, colors, and symbols, a library alive with vision. The Aztec codices were unique among the libraries of the world. Instead of long lines of written text, they unfolded in brilliant panels, painted with glyphs and figures. Their pages were coated with lime, making a white surface for pigments of red, blue, yellow, and black. Scribes painted with fine brushes made of hair, their hands steady as they traced gods and warriors, calendars, and ceremonies. To read an Aztec codex was to follow a path of images, a narrative that blended history with prophecy, ritual with art. Imagine an Aztec scribe at work in a palace chamber. The room is lit by the glow of torches, the walls painted with murals of jaguars and eagles. Before him lies a folded sheet of amado paper, its surface bright and smooth. With a brush dipped in red pigment, he paints a glyph of the sun, then adds figures of priests carrying offerings. Each symbol carries layers of meaning, time, story, prophecy, more than words alone could convey. The codex grows panel by panel, a library of visions unfolding beneath his hand. The codices recorded every aspect of Aztec life. Some were ritual calendars, tracking the sacred cycles of 260 days and 365 days, guiding ceremonies and festivals. Others recorded tribute, lists of goods and labor owed by conquered provinces, painted with symbols of maize, cloth, or jade. Still others preserved history, telling of migrations, battles, and the rise of rulers. To the Aztecs, these books were not only records but living guides, essential for governance, religion, and survival. Picture a priest consulting a codex before a temple ceremony. He unfolds the painted pages, the images glowing in torchlight. He traces the glyphs with his finger, reading the time for sacrifice, the offerings to be made, the chants to be sung. Around him, the city hums, the lake glimmers, the mountains rise in silence. Yet within the codex lies the rhythm of the cosmos itself, the calendar that binds heaven and earth. But fragility shadowed these painted libraries. When the Spanish arrived in the early 16th century, they saw the codices not as wisdom, but as idolatry. Hernán Cortés and his followers gathered them, and missionaries later burned them in great bonfires, fearing their images as dangerous. What centuries of careful painting had preserved vanished in flames within days. Only a small handful, fewer than 24, survived. Imagine the scene of burning. Codices piled in a square, their painted pages curling in fire, colors dissolving into smoke. Priests and scribes watch, their faces lit by the flames, their hearts heavy with loss. The silence that follows is not only the silence of fire's aftermath, but the silence of knowledge erased. Libraries that once guided a civilization are reduced to ash, their visions gone, yet fragments remain. The surviving codices, like the Codex Mendoza, the Codex Borgia, and the Codex Bourbonicus, offer glimpses of what was lost. Their images still speak, their colors still glow, their glyphs still whisper of time, ritual, and history. To hold one today is to feel both wonder and grief, to glimpse a vast library reduced to fragments, yet still luminous. The Aztec codices remind us that libraries are not only words upon pages, but visions upon surfaces, memories painted in color. They teach that knowledge can be carried in symbols, in cycles of time, in art as much as in text. And they remind us that loss, though immense, cannot erase memory entirely. For even in fragments, the painted voices of the Aztecs endured. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine unfolding a painted codex. Bright glyphs glow before you, suns, moons, jaguars, priests, and dancers. The figures move across the page like a dance of memory. Outside, the city of Tenochtitlan shimmers upon the lake. The mountains loom, the stars wheel above. Within the codex, the cosmos is painted, alive, eternal, fragile, enduring. The land of Greece, with its olive groves, marble temples, and blue seas, gave the world some of its greatest voices. Philosophers who asked questions of truth, poets who sang of gods and heroes, historians who traced the rise and fall of empires. All left their mark upon scrolls of papyrus. Yet of the thousands of works composed in that age, only a fraction survive. The rest drift into silence, their words lost to fire, decay, and forgetfulness, leaving us only echoes of what once was. The Greeks saw writing not only as record but as conversation with eternity. In Athens, scrolls filled private collections, public archives, and the minds of citizens who gathered in stoas to debate. Tragedies were performed in open theaters, their lines later copied by scribes. Philosophical dialogues flowed from the pens of Plato, Aristotle, and countless others. Libraries such as those of Aristotle himself or the archives of city-states held texts that shaped centuries to come. Imagine a scribe in Athens during the 4th century BCE. He sits in a shaded courtyard, papyrus unrolled upon a wooden table. With a reed pen, he copies a play of Sophocles, the ink flowing black against pale fibers. Children run past outside, merchants shout in the agora, but within this courtyard there is only the steady rhythm of thought made visible. The scroll grows slowly, line by line, preserving words meant for voices upon a stage, but destined also for silent readers centuries away. The works of Greece covered every realm. Historians such as Herodotus and Thucydides chronicled wars and wanderings. Philosophers such as Anaxagoras, Zeno, and Democritus wrote treatises that only fragments now recall. Dramatists filled theaters with plays, yet of Aeschylus's 90 works, only 7 remain. Of Sophocles' more than 100, again, only 7 survive. The rest, hundreds of plays, countless characters, entire choruses, have vanished, their words now only shadows. Picture the Library of Alexandria, where so many Greek works were once stored. Scrolls carried from Athens, from Rhodes, from the islands of Ionia, rested upon shelves. Some were copied, others left to sleep. But when flames touched those shelves, many Greek voices turned to ash. What we read today is but a remnant, a handful, of survivors rescued by chance from the silence of destruction, and yet, fragments speak. A line quoted by another author, a scrap of papyrus unearthed in the sands of Egypt, a single page hidden in a medieval manuscript. These are the voices that survive. Through them we glimpse what was lost, comedies of Menander, philosophies of Epicurus, histories of vanished city-states. Each fragment is like a shard of pottery from a broken vase, incomplete, yet still beautiful, still carrying the shape of what once was whole. In monasteries of Byzantium, scribes copied some Greek texts onto parchment, ensuring their survival. Through the Middle Ages, from them, Plato, Aristotle, Homer, and others reached the Renaissance, shaping modern thought. Yet behind these preserved works lies the vast silence of all that did not endure. Thousands of scrolls that once filled libraries and hands, now gone to as you close your eyes tonight. Imagine standing in an ancient Greek library. Wooden shelves hold scrolls tied with cords, their titles written in red ink. You unroll one and see lines of verse, a tragedy never before heard in your time, its chorus singing of fate and gods. Outside, the cicadas hum in olive trees, the sea glitters in sunlight. Inside, you hold a voice across time, fragile, fleeting, yet alive. And then imagine letting it slip back into silence, a reminder that much of Greece is no longer ours, but lingers only as whisper. The vanished scrolls of Greece teach us the paradox of memory, that greatness does not guarantee survival, that even the most profound voices may be silenced. Yet they also remind us that fragments can shine, that whispers can guide, that even in loss, beauty remains. Not all libraries were built of stone or filled with shelves. Some lived in voices, in memory, in the breath of words carried from teacher to student across generations. In the misty lands of Celtic Europe, among oak groves and standing stones, the Druids held a library unlike any other, one that could not burn, could not be scattered by war, for it was housed within the human mind. Their knowledge, vast and sacred, was preserved not in scrolls of papyrus or parchment, but in the silence of memory, in the rhythm of spoken words. The Druids were the learned class of the Celts, priests, judges, poets, and keepers of lore. They studied the stars, the cycles of the moon, the laws of tribes, the stories of gods and heroes. They memorized poems that stretched for days, genealogies that traced back centuries, rituals that bound their people to the sacred rhythms of nature. Writing, they believed, diminished memory, so they refused to set their wisdom upon scrolls, choosing instead to preserve it through discipline of mind and voice. Imagine a druid gathering in a forest clearing at dusk. A circle of stones rises behind them, the air filled with the scent of oak and mist. A druid elder speaks, his voice deep and steady, reciting the tale of a hero's voyage across the sea. Around him, younger druids listen intently, repeating the lines under their breath, committing each word to heart. No ink records the story, no parchment carries its weight, yet in their minds it takes root, carried forward like a flame passed from torch to torch. Their oral libraries were immense. Roman writers tell us that it could take 20 years to master the knowledge of a druid, years of memorization and study beneath oak trees. Astronomy, philosophy, law, healing, poetry, all bound within memory. Their voices were scrolls, their recitations codices, their gatherings libraries. Each druid was a shelf of knowledge, each assembly a library alive with sound. Picture a festival upon a hilltop, fires burning bright against the night sky. Druids stand in white robes, their voices raised in chant. Poets recite long verses of ancestors, singers recount myths of creation, judges declare laws remembered from generations past. The stars wheel above, the earth hums below, and in that moment, the oral library of a people breathes. No hall of stone is needed. The sky itself is the ceiling, the ground the foundation, the voices the shelves. Yet fragility haunted even this library of memory. When Rome conquered Celtic lands, when Christianity spread across Europe, the voices of druids grew fewer. Their knowledge, unrecorded, slipped away with each life lost. Some fragments survive, myths written down later by Christian scribes in Ireland, poems remembered in Wales, stories retold in Brittany. But much is gone, vanished not in flames but in silence, forgotten as generations passed. Still, echoes remain. The myths of Cu Chulainn, of the Mabinogion, of Arthurian legends carry faint traces of druidic lore. The cycles of festivals, Samhain, Beltane, Imbolc, Lughnasadh, still mark the seasons in folk memory. The reverence for oak, mistletoe, and sacred groves lingers in tradition. Though their libraries of memory faded, their whispers still move in the wind across Celtic hills. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine sitting beside a druid in a quiet grove. The leaves rustle above, a fire glows softly, and the elder begins to speak. His words flow like water, carrying you into myths of gods and heroes, into cycles of stars and seasons. You listen, repeating each line under your breath, becoming part of the chain of memory. No scroll is needed, for the story is alive within you, carried in silence, preserved in your breath. The Druids remind us that not all libraries are written. Some live only in voices, in memory, in the fragile yet enduring chain of human recall. Their loss is great, but their lesson remains. That knowledge is not only ink on page, but spirit in word, a library alive in silence. High upon the hills of Anatolia, where the land rises into rugged plateaus and forests of oak and pine, the Hittite kings built their capital, Hattusa. Behind its mighty walls, carved into stone cliffs and guarded by lions at its gates, lay one of the earliest and most remarkable collections of knowledge, the royal archives. These were not scrolls of papyrus nor parchment codices, but tablets of clay, inscribed with the wedge-shaped lines of cuneiform. Thousands of them filled storerooms and chambers, creating a library both fragile and enduring, silent for centuries, yet still able to whisper today. The Hittites, who ruled much of Anatolia and beyond during the second millennium BCE, understood the power of the written word. They corresponded with Egypt, Babylon, and Assyria, their kings exchanging treaties and letters with other rulers of the ancient world. Their scribes recorded laws, rituals, myths, and omens, inscribing them patiently into wet clay, then drying, or firing them to last. Shelves of tablets filled their archives, each piece small, heavy, and silent, yet carrying voices of kings and priests, merchants and messengers. Imagine stepping into one of these archive rooms in Hattusa. The walls are lined with wooden shelves, upon which clay tablets are stacked neatly, each marked with small impressions. A scribe kneels in the center, a stylus in hand, pressing wedge after wedge into a tablet, the soft clay yielding beneath his touch. The room is cool, lit by torches, filled with the faint earthy scent of damp clay. Around him, other scribes work silently. The only sounds the soft scratching of styluses and the shuffle of sandals on stone. The contents of the Hittite archives were vast. They held international treaties, including the famous peace treaty with Ramses II of Egypt, one of the earliest surviving diplomatic agreements. They preserved laws that governed daily life, edicts from kings, and lists of offerings to the gods. They contained myths and stories, some unique to the Hittites, others adapted from Mesopotamian and Hurrian traditions. In their tablets, the Hittites preserved not only politics and ritual but imagination and story. Picture a scribe reading aloud one such myth to an audience in a palace hall. He holds a clay tablet in his hands, its surface rough, the characters small and dense. His voice rises and falls as he tells the tale of gods battling monsters, of storms and harvests, of order and chaos. The listeners sit in silence, hearing their world reflected in the words, their faith and memory reinforced through clay-bound stories. The tablet is returned to the shelves, where it will rest for centuries, silent but enduring. Yet fragility shadowed Hattusa's archives. Clay is durable, but the city itself was not. In the 12th century BCE, as the Bronze Age collapsed and empires fell, Hattusa was abandoned. Fires swept through its halls, palaces crumbled, shelves toppled. Many tablets were broken, scattered among the ruins. For centuries, they lay buried in earth, forgotten beneath grass and stone. The library was silent, its shelves empty, its voices stilled. When archaeologists uncovered Hattusa in modern times, they discovered thousands of tablets, shattered, scattered, yet still readable. The voices of kings and scribes returned, telling us of treaties, rituals, and myths once thought lost. To hold one of these tablets today is to feel the weight of memory, heavy in the hand, rough upon the skin, carrying impressions pressed more than 3,000 years ago. Their silence had lasted millennia, but their voices still endure. The archives of Hattusa remind us that libraries are not always fragile paper or silk. Sometimes they are clay, heavy and earthy, surviving fire and conquest, waiting in silence beneath the ground. Yet even they are not eternal. Much was lost, stories that broke in fire, tablets that crumbled, shelves that toppled into dust. The silence of Hattusa is filled with both survival and absence, both voices preserved and voices gone. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine standing in the ruins of Hattusa. The great stone gates rise around you, lions carved in relief watching. Silently, you enter a room where shelves once stood, now filled with broken fragments of clay. You kneel, pick up a shard, and see upon it the wedge-shaped lines of cuneiform, still clear, still steady. In your hand, a voice returns, a whisper. From the Bronze Age, fragile yet enduring. In the far west of the Islamic world, across the Straits of Gibraltar, in the fertile valleys of southern Spain, there once rose a city of light and learning, Córdoba. During the 10th century, under the Umayyad caliphs of Al-Andalus, it became one of the greatest centers of knowledge in the medieval world. Its streets were paved and lit with lamps, its gardens filled with fountains and citrus trees, its palaces adorned with marble and mosaics. But above all, it was famed for its libraries, collections of books so vast that they rivaled, perhaps even surpassed, any in the known world. The Caliph al-Hakam II, ruling in the mid-10th century, devoted himself to books as much as to governance. He sent emissaries across the Islamic world to purchase rare manuscripts from Cairo, Baghdad, Damascus, Karawah, even from the distant east. Caravans returned to Cordoba laden not with spices or gold, but with books bound in leather, their pages filled with wisdom. By his reign, the library of Cordoba was said to hold hundreds of thousands of volumes, perhaps as many as 400,000. Though the numbers may be exaggerated, the scale was certainly immense. Imagine stepping into this library. The air is cool, scented with leather and ink. Shelves line the walls, filled with volumes bound in red and brown, their spines marked with golden script. Scholars move between them, robes trailing upon marble floors. Some sit at low desks, reading aloud from Arabic translations of Aristotle or Galen. Others copy texts by lamplight, their reed pens steady, their hands moving swiftly. The sound is one of murmured study, the rustle of parchment, the scratch of pens, the soft rhythm of thought preserved. Cordoba's libraries were not confined to the caliph's palace. Scholars, judges, and poets kept their own collections, and the city itself became a living library. Bookshops thrived, scribes worked tirelessly, and knowledge was shared in mosques, gardens, and homes. The works preserved covered not only theology but medicine, mathematics, astronomy, poetry, and philosophy. Greek classics translated into Arabic were studied beside original works of Muslim scholars. To walk through Cordoba was to feel thought itself alive, woven into the fabric of the city. Picture a night in Cordoba. The lamps of the streets glow, casting golden light upon whitewashed walls. Within the caliph's palace, scholars gather in a hall of books. One reads from a text on astronomy, another discusses medicine, a third recites poetry beneath an archway carved with geometric designs. Outside, the gardens murmur with fountains. The scent of orange blossoms fills the air. Within, the library is alive, a palace not of stone alone but of memory. But as with so many libraries, impermanence shadowed Cordoba. Political struggles weakened the caliphate, and in the early 11th century, civil war tore the city apart. In the chaos, libraries were plundered, manuscripts scattered or burned. Centuries later, during the Christian reconquest, further losses followed. Some books were preserved, carried to Toledo and elsewhere, where they were translated into Latin and spread across Europe, sparking the Renaissance. Yet much was lost. Whole shelves of poetry, philosophy, and science vanished, their voices silenced. Imagine the silence of a burned library in Cordoba. The marble floors are blackened, the shelves empty. Fragments of parchment flutter in the air, their ink smudged, their words incomplete. Outside, the city still hums with life, but within, a vast memory is gone. The voices of scholars, poets, and physicians lie silent, their knowledge dissolved into smoke. And yet, Cordoba's influence endures. The translations made their carried Aristotle, Galen, Euclid, and countless others into the heart of Europe. From its libraries, seeds of knowledge spread into Paris, Bologna, Oxford, and beyond. The memory of Cordoba is not only loss, but continuity, a reminder that even when shelves fall, voices can survive, carried onward by those who heard them. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine walking through Cordoba at twilight. The lamps glow, the fountains murmur, and within a palace chamber, shelves of books rise high. You run your hand across a leather-bound volume, its script flowing in gold, its pages filled with voices of many lands. Outside, the city breathes with poetry and science, with prayer and debate. Within, the library hums softly, fragile yet luminous, a whisper across time. In the high valleys of the Andes, where mountains rise like giants into the clouds and terraces climb the slopes in careful steps, the Inca built an empire without books. Unlike the scrolls of Egypt or the parchment of Europe, their libraries were not of ink and paper, but of cord and knot, of memory woven into string. These were the quipus, cords of cotton or wool, knotted in intricate patterns, dyed in subtle colors, arranged in rows and clusters. In them lay records of numbers, histories, and perhaps even stories, a library not written but tied. The quipu was more than a tool. It was a system of thought. Each knot represented numbers, each cord a category, each color a meaning. To an untrained eye, it looked like a tangle of strings, but to the Quipikamaic, the keepers of the knots, it was as clear as ink upon parchment. They could read the knots as one might read a page, reciting lists of tribute, recounting genealogies, measuring harvests. In their hands, the empire was counted and remembered. Imagine a Quipikamaic seated in a village plaza. Before him lies a bundle of cords, dyed red, blue, and yellow. He runs his fingers along them, feeling the knots, counting their meaning. Around him, villagers listen as he recites the tribute ode to the emperor: maize from one terrace, wool from another, silver from the mines. His voice is steady, his fingers sure, the cords an extension of his memory. No ink is needed, no scrolls carried. The library lives in string and speech, in touch and sound. The Inca kept vast networks of quipus across their empire. Couriers carried them along the great roads, from the highlands to the coast, from Cusco to distant provinces. Each quipu was a fragment of the empire's library, a strand in the web of memory. Together, they created a system of knowledge as sophisticated as any written archive, yet different, embodied in texture and rhythm. But quipus were not only numbers. Some scholars believe they carried narratives as well, histories, myths, perhaps even poetry. The patterns of knots, the spacing, the colors may have formed a language beyond mathematics, a script of fibers. If so, the Inca preserved stories not upon pages but within woven codes, their voices tied into strings that swayed gently in mountain air. Picture a ceremony in Cusco. The emperor sits upon a golden throne, priests beside him, nobles gathered in rows. A Quipikamaic steps forward, holding a quipu of many colors. He recites the history of a lineage, the victories of battles, the offerings made to gods. His hands move along the cords, his voice weaving the past into the present. The quipu glimmers in sunlight, its knots small yet vast, carrying memory in silence. Yet fragility haunted these libraries. When the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, they looked upon quipus with suspicion. To them, the cords seemed strange, unreadable, perhaps even heretical. Many were destroyed, burned in plazas as symbols of paganism. Others were discarded, their meanings lost as the Quipikamaic perished, or were silenced. What had been the memory of an empire dissolved into fragments, cords without voices, strings without readers. Today, only a few hundred quipus survive, scattered in museums and collections. Their knots remain, but their language is uncertain. Scholars study them, seeking patterns, decoding numbers, glimpsing meanings. Yet much remains a mystery. The voices of the Inca whisper still, but faintly, like echoes through mountain valleys. The quipus remind us that libraries need not be written. They can be woven, sung, remembered. They teach us that knowledge is not bound to ink or parchment, but can live in hands, in voices, in knots of string. Their loss is great, but their lesson endures, that memory takes many forms, fragile yet enduring. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine holding a quipu. The cords are soft, dyed in faded colors, the knots small beneath your fingertips. You trace them slowly, feeling the rhythm of numbers, the echo of stories. Outside, the Andes rise against the sky, their peaks white with snow, their valleys green with terraces. In your hands lies a library of knots, silent yet alive, whispering across time. When armies crossed seas carrying banners of the cross, when knights rode eastward and citadels rose upon contested ground, the clash of civilizations brought not only battle but silence. For in the wake of the Crusades, those centuries of conflict between Christian and Muslim powers, many libraries, monasteries, and archives were scattered, plundered, or lost to fire. It was an age of devotion and zeal, but also one of erasure, when the quiet work of scribes was often drowned in the noise of war. In Jerusalem, Antioch, Acre, and countless smaller towns, books and scrolls were as vulnerable as walls and towers. Monks, imams, rabbis, and scholars each held collections of texts, scriptures, histories, commentaries, medical treatises. Some were housed in monasteries perched on hillsides, others in mosques adorned with calligraphy, still others in private homes. To their keepers, these were treasures of the spirit. To invading armies, they were often trophies of conquest or fuel for fire. Imagine a monastery in the hills of the Levant. Its stone walls glow in the morning sun, its chapel bells echo across olive groves. Within its library, shelves of parchment codices rest in silence, their covers bound in leather, their pages filled with Latin psalms, Greek philosophy, or Syriac homilies. A monk walks slowly between the shelves, his hand brushing against spines, his lips whispering prayers. Outside, he hears distant hoofbeats, the approach of soldiers. He pauses, knowing that the silence of the library may soon be broken. When Crusader armies took cities, manuscripts were often seized. Some were carried west, finding their way into cathedrals or private collections. Others were destroyed in sackings, their parchments torn, their bindings stripped of precious metals, their pages scattered. Fires lit for war consumed not only homes, but centuries of memory. In turn, when Muslim forces retook cities, Christian archives sometimes met the same fate, caught in the cycle of conquest and revenge. Libraries became silent casualties of zeal. Yet there were also moments of preservation, when books passed between cultures instead of perishing. In Antioch and Toledo, translators gathered texts from Arabic into Latin, carrying forward works of Aristotle, Galen, and others that had been preserved in Islamic libraries. The Crusades were not only an age of destruction, but of uneasy transmission. Knowledge crossing boundaries even as armies clashed. Picture the scriptorium of a monastery in Europe, where returning crusaders brought foreign manuscripts. A monk sits at a desk, copying an Arabic commentary on Aristotle into Latin. His quill moves steadily, his lamp glows, the words flow across the page. Outside, the bells toll for prayer, but within, knowledge passes silently from one culture to another, preserved despite the storms of war. Still, the losses were immense. Many chronicles of local peoples vanished, their voices erased. Countless commentaries, poems, and medical treatises disappeared. Some monasteries that had stood for centuries were emptied in a single night, their shelves left bare. The silence that followed was deep, the silence not only of lost books, but of lost voices, lost memories, lost bridges between cultures. And yet, as always, fragments endure. Some manuscripts carried west in crusaders' chests found new homes. In European libraries, where they shaped scholastic thought. Others hidden by monks or imams survived in secret, rediscovered centuries later. The very idea of preservation, that books are treasures to be guarded even in times of war, was reinforced by the losses of the Crusades. Out of silence grew resilience. Out of fire grew the determination to protect memory. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine standing in a monastery library on the eve of conquest. Candles flicker against stone walls. Rows of codices glow in lamplight, their pages filled with prayers and wisdom. Outside, the sound of soldiers grows louder, the clash of swords closer. You reach for a volume, press it to your chest, and carry it into the shadows, seeking to preserve one voice from the coming storm. The silence that follows may be heavy, but within it, a fragment endures. High upon the plateaus of East Africa, where rugged cliffs rise into clouds and valleys stretch into shadow, lies a tradition of preservation unlike any other. In Ethiopia, Christianity took root in the early centuries of the faith, and with it came manuscripts, handwritten in Ge'ez, the ancient liturgical language, filled with scripture, hymns, and history. These were not housed in vast palaces of marble, nor in sprawling urban libraries, but in hidden monasteries built upon mountaintops and carved into rock. Their shelves were small, but their silence immense, for within those pages lay the memory of a people. The Ethiopian monasteries were often accessible only by rope, by narrow paths, or by sheer climbs. Monks carried manuscripts upon their backs, wrapped in cloth, hidden from raiders and armies. Inside the stone chambers of churches like Debre Damo or the rock-hewn sanctuaries of Lalibela, manuscripts were laid in carved niches or stored in wooden chests. Bound in leather, adorned with vivid illuminations of saints and angels, they glowed in the dim light of oil lamps. Imagine a monk seated in one such chamber. The stone walls are rough, cool to the touch. A single window looks out upon endless valleys where the wind whistles softly. Before him rests a manuscript upon a wooden lectern. Its pages are of parchment, thick and yellowed, its script flowing in black and red, its margins painted with vivid saints whose eyes seem to follow the reader. The monk dips his reed pen into ink, slowly copying a hymn. Around him, the silence is complete, broken only by the wind outside and the scratch of his pen. These libraries contained more than scripture. Chronicles recorded the reigns of kings, the struggles of wars, the movements of stars, the wisdom of medicine. Hymns blended with history, theology with legend. Each manuscript was a bridge between worlds, heaven and earth, past and present, Ethiopia and Christendom beyond. Though far from Rome or Constantinople, Ethiopian monks created a library that stood apart, resilient in isolation. Picture a procession during a festival. Monks carry manuscripts wrapped in silk, holding them as sacred relics. They chant in deep voices, the sound echoing across the cliffs. Villagers gather below, their eyes lifted, their hearts filled with reverence. To them, the manuscripts are not only books, but living presences, guardians of memory and faith. Yet fragility lingered. Raids and invasions threatened monasteries, fires sometimes consumed their treasures, and time wore away parchment and ink. Still, the remoteness of these mountain sanctuaries preserved much that would have been lost elsewhere. While vast libraries of Europe or Asia fell to conquest or neglect, Ethiopia's manuscripts endured, protected by cliffs and silence. Even in modern times, many of these collections remain hidden, accessible only with great effort. Scholars who glimpse them speak of illuminated gospels, painted in rich reds, blues, and golds, their pages thick and heavy, their bindings darkened with age. Some are carried down only for festivals, returned afterward to their niches in stone walls. They survive not by accident but by devotion, by the hands of monks who believe that to preserve a book is to preserve a soul. The hidden libraries of Ethiopia remind us that knowledge can survive in unlikely places. Where mountains guard, where monks endure, where silence reigns, memory persists. They show us that a library need not be vast to be powerful. Even a single illuminated gospel can carry centuries within it, glowing softly in the dark that as you close your eyes tonight. Imagine climbing a narrow path to a monastery perched upon a cliff. The wind tugs at your robe. The valley yawns below. The sky glows with sunset. You enter a stone chamber, cool and dim, where shelves carved into the wall hold manuscripts wrapped in cloth. A monk opens one for you. Its pages gleam with color. Its script flows steady. Its presence feels eternal. In that silence, the library whispers across time, fragile yet enduring. Across the endless grasslands of Eurasia, the hoofbeats of horses thundered, carrying with them the armies of the Mongols. In the 13th century, under Genghis Khan and his descendants, they built the largest contiguous empire the world had ever known, stretching from the shores of the Pacific to the plains of Hungary. Yet in the shadow of conquest, countless libraries and archives fell silent. Palaces, monasteries, mosques, and temples that had safeguarded manuscripts for centuries went up in flames, their shelves collapsing into ash. The Mongol conquests brought not only new connections across continents, but also one of history's greatest dispersals of written memory. The Mongols themselves valued knowledge, but in a different form. They preserved oral traditions, genealogies recited by bards, and laws codified in the Yasa. They admired scribes and occasionally spared scholars, employing them in administration. Yet the fury of their campaigns often left little room for libraries to survive. Cities that resisted were destroyed, their archives lost in fire. Only fragments escaped, carried by survivors or hidden by fleeing monks and scholars. Imagine the city of Baghdad in 1258. Once home to the great House of Wisdom, its libraries had drawn scholars from across the Islamic world. But when Hulagu Khan's armies breached its walls, the city burned for days. Legends say that the Tigris ran black with ink, blue with the bindings of manuscripts tossed into the river. Whether exaggerated or not, the truth remains. Countless works of science, philosophy, and poetry were lost. Shelves that had once held the memory of civilizations collapsed into silence, their voices drowned in conquest. Picture Samarkand, Nishapur, Merv, great cities of Central Asia, each home to schools, mosques, and archives. In their libraries lay texts of medicine, astronomy, theology, and history. When Mongol armies arrived, fire consumed parchment and paper, and knowledge that had endured for centuries was erased in hours. Monasteries in Tibet, temples in northern China, and Christian churches along the Silk Road all felt the touch of destruction, their manuscripts scattered like leaves in the wind. And yet, paradoxically, the Mongol Empire also created new networks of knowledge. Once conquests settled, once cities were rebuilt, the Pax Mongolica allowed ideas to travel along secure trade routes. Scholars moved between China, Persia, and Europe, carrying texts with them. Some works destroyed in one city found new homes in another. Paper itself, first born in China, spread widely under Mongol rule, becoming the material of choice for memory across continents. Even amid loss, transmission endured. Picture a caravan traveling along the Silk Road. Among the bolts of silk and sacks of spices rests a chest of manuscripts, Buddhist sutras, medical treatises, Quranic commentaries. The camels plod steadily, their bells ringing softly, while scholars walk beside them, guarding their fragile cargo. The desert wind blows, the mountains loom, but the caravan endures. In this way, fragments of knowledge survive the storm, carried onward even as fires consumed their homes. The Mongols themselves eventually built libraries in their new capitals. In Karakoram, scribes copied texts for the Khans. In Yuan dynasty China, the Mongol rulers preserved Chinese classics and patronized scholars. In Persia, Ilkhanid rulers supported translations of astronomical works, some of which survive today. These efforts could not replace what had been lost, but they reveal the complexity of conquest, destruction, and preservation intertwined. Still, the silence remains heavy. The works that perished in Baghdad's flames, the manuscripts buried. Beneath the ruins of Central Asia, the scrolls lost in temples and mosques. These are voices we can never hear. They remind us that libraries, no matter how great, are fragile before the storms of empire. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine walking through the ruins of a conquered city. Charred shelves stand like skeletons, fragments of parchment lie scattered in ash. You pick up a scrap, its ink smudged, its words incomplete. The silence is immense, yet within it, you feel the weight of all that was lost, and the faint whisper of what survived, carried onward by caravans, by memory, by chance. After centuries in which much of Europe's knowledge lay in cloisters and monasteries, bound in leather and hidden in scriptoria, a quiet awakening began. It was not the sudden blaze of fire, but the slow kindling of a lamp. In the 14th and 15th centuries, scholars began to search for forgotten texts, seeking voices of the ancients buried in dust and silence. The Renaissance, the rebirth, was not only of art and architecture but of libraries, rediscovered, reopened, re-illuminated after long centuries of sleep. These hidden libraries were often not in grand palaces but in monastic cellars, cathedral cupboards, or private collections neglected by generations. Scrolls and codices lay piled in wooden chests, their parchment stiff with age, their ink fading but still alive. Some had traveled from Byzantium before its fall, others slept quietly in abbeys of Germany, Italy, or France. To the eyes of humanists, these were treasures greater than gold. Voices of Cicero, Plato, Lucretius, Vitruvius, long thought lost, suddenly speaking again. Imagine Petrarch, the Italian poet and scholar, rummaging through a dusty chest in the 14th century. He lifts a codex, its leather cover cracked, its pages smelling of age and candle smoke. He opens it and finds the words of Cicero, preserved in Latin, a voice of Rome speaking across 1,000 years. Petrarch copies it carefully, his quill, scratching in excitement, knowing he has revived a voice nearly erased by time. For him, and for those who followed, each discovery was a resurrection, a lost library speaking again. Picture Poggio Bracciolini, a papal secretary, wandering through a German monastery in the early 15th century. The monks lead him into a cold storeroom, where shelves sag under the weight of forgotten codices. He lights a candle, the flame flickering against stone walls, and pulls a volume free. It is Lucretius's De Rerum Natura, long vanished from memory, its lines of poetry carrying the rhythm of atoms, the philosophy of Epicurean thought. Poggio copies it, and from his efforts, a single surviving manuscript spreads into Europe, shaping thought for centuries to come. The Renaissance hunger for manuscripts was insatiable. Scholars traveled across Europe, into Constantinople, into the Levant, seeking libraries forgotten or hidden. When Byzantium fell to the Ottomans in 1453, many Greek scholars fled westward, carrying with them texts in Greek: Plato, Aristotle, Homer, Galen. These became seeds planted in Italy, flowering into new translations, new studies, new libraries. Imagine Florence at this time. In the palaces of the Medici, rooms are lined with shelves of parchment and vellum, newly copied and bound. Humanists gather to read Plato in Greek, Aristotle in Latin, the words flowing into debates of philosophy, politics, and art. Candlelight glows against frescoed walls, manuscripts lie open upon carved desks, and voices murmur in excitement. The rediscovered libraries breathe, their silence broken, their words alive once more. The invention of the printing press in the mid-15th century transformed this revival into permanence. What had been fragile manuscripts, limited to a handful of copies, became books multiplied by thousands. Gutenberg's press in Mainz, and those that followed, ensured that no single fire, no single conquest, could so easily erase memory again. Libraries grew not only by discovery, but by reproduction, their shelves filled with volumes that carried ancient voices into modernity. Yet the silence of loss remained alongside the joy of rediscovery. Scholars knew that for every manuscript they unearthed, countless others were gone. The tragedies of Sophocles, the histories of Livy, the philosophies of countless unknowns, these still whispered only as shadows. The Renaissance celebrated rebirth, but also mourned absence, hearing both the voices that returned and the silence that endured. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine yourself as a traveler in the Renaissance. You walk into a monastery library. The air cool, the shelves lined with dusty volumes. A candle flickers, and you unroll a parchment untouched for centuries. The words of an ancient poet greet you, fragile yet alive. Outside, Florence hums with artists and architects, but within this library, you are part of a quieter rebirth, the rediscovery of memory, the awakening of voices long silent. We often think of lost libraries as tragedies of the ancient world: Alexandria in flames, Nalanda smoldering, codices of the Maya turned to ash. Yet the silence of libraries has not been confined to distant centuries. Even in the modern age, when printing presses multiplied books and shelves stretched across continents, fire and war continued to erase memory. The fragility of the written word remains, reminding us that knowledge, though vast, is never invulnerable. One of the most haunting losses came during the Second World War. In 1943, bombs fell upon Hamburg, destroying the great library there, its manuscripts and rare books reduced to smoke. In 1945, the Library of Louvain in Belgium, rebuilt after being burned in the First World War, was consumed again, its shelves collapsing, its volumes charred. Cities across Europe saw their archives destroyed, manuscripts lost not to neglect, but to fire from the sky. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with grief for voices gone. Imagine standing in a library during an air raid. The lights flicker. The shelves tremble, dust falls from the ceiling. Then fire takes hold, spreading across rows of books, their bindings cracking in the heat. The air fills with smoke and ash, pages curling into nothing. Outside, sirens wail, but inside, centuries vanish in minutes. The silence after the flames is not empty but weighted, heavy with the absence of memory. Beyond war, accidents too have taken their toll. In 1986, the library of the Soviet Academy of Sciences in Leningrad caught fire, destroying hundreds of thousands of volumes. In 2004, flames consumed parts of the Duchess Anna Amalia Library in Weimar, erasing treasures of music, philosophy, and history. More recently, in 2018, Brazil's National Museum in Rio de Janeiro burned, its collections of books and artifacts lost to smoke and ash. Each time, the same truth emerged. Even in the modern age, memory is fragile, knowledge vulnerable to chance. Picture Rio's museum before the fire. Tall wooden shelves lined with books, manuscripts stacked carefully, the air filled with the scent of parchment and dust. Visitors walk slowly through halls, pausing to read labels, to admire bindings, to listen to echoes of history. Then imagine it after the flames. Blackened walls, shelves collapsed, ashes thick upon the floor. The silence of loss lingers, a reminder that nothing is immune, and yet resilience remains. In each of these tragedies, people rushed to save what they could. Librarians carried volumes into the streets. Volunteers formed chains to pass books from hand to hand. Archivists worked for decades to restore half-burned manuscripts. After fire, silence is never absolute. Fragments endure. Voices whisper still. Memory refuses to vanish entirely. The modern losses remind us of something deeper, that libraries are not only shelves of paper, but reflections of human effort. Each book is the work of a hand, a mind, a voice. To lose a library is to lose not only memory, but connection, the bridge between generations. And to rebuild one is to reaffirm the faith that knowledge, though fragile, is worth preserving. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine walking through a modern library. The shelves rise high, filled with books bound in colors of red, green, and brown. Sunlight streams through tall windows, dust motes drifting in golden beams. You pull a volume from the shelf, open its pages, and breathe in the faint scent of ink and paper. Outside, the world hums with its noise, but within, silence reigns, a silence not of loss, but of peace. You feel the weight of memory in your hands, fragile yet enduring, alive in the present.